Good morning, everyone. There we go. That's Monday morning, right? My name is Tony Penny, and I am the director of the Walter and Lenore Annenberg Presidential Learning Center here at the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation. And on behalf of everyone here at the foundation, it is my honor to welcome you to our place. It's customary here at the library, and given our distinguished speaker today, along with the recent celebration of our nation's veterans, it seems especially apropos that we honor our men and women in uniform by starting each program with the Pledge of Allegiance. We are honored today to have representatives from the Oxnard Air Force Junior ROTC and the Hueneme Navy Junior ROTC lead us in the pledge. So please stand. Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. Please be seated. Now, before we bring our speakers to the stage this morning, I wanted to recognize a couple of the special guests we have joining us in the audience today. Let's see, is Dr. Sumakian here, the superintendent? I know he's supposed to be joining us. I haven't seen him yet. Well, if you do show up, thank you for coming today. I'd also like to recognize the Associate Vice President for Education at LACMA, as well as the Chair of the Education Committee for the American Alliance of Museums, Ms. Sarah Jesse. Thank you for joining us today. Ms. Cunningham Miller from Congressman Brownlee's office, thank you for coming today. And from the senior staff here at the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation, our Chief Development Officer, John Shaw, thank you for coming. Our CFO, Mr. Glenn Baker, and our Chief Administrative Officer, Ms. Joanne Drake, thank you very much for coming. I also wanted to thank the partners who spent months in putting this program together and reaching out to the community. From the Oxnard Library, Ms. Sophia Kimsey and Karen Schatz, thank you so much. From the Camarillo Library, Barbara Wolf, thank you. And from Cal Humanities, Felicia Kelly, thank you so much. And I hope you don't mind if I take just a moment to explain why I think President Reagan would have enjoyed today's event. As you may be aware, and if not, as you walk through the library today, you will become aware, President Reagan was a tremendous advocate of freedom. He believed that freedom was the birthright of every human and that freedom meant opportunity. But freedom is not easy. In a speech to the Medal of Honor recipients, he said, "The price of freedom is high, but never more costly than the loss of freedom. And freedom, we must always remember, is never more than a generation away from extinction. Each generation must do whatever is necessary to preserve it and pass it on to the next, or it will be lost forever." Our speaker today has done more than his fair share both to preserve freedom through his service in the Marine Corps and to pass freedom on to the next generation through his writing and through conversations like the one that's about to take place. But you'll hear more about and from him momentarily. The preservation and passing of freedom is not the job of any one person. So, in fact, it's much more effective when many of us work together on behalf of it. So the last thing I'd like to do is take just a moment to recognize those who've dedicated themselves to the preservation and passing of freedom. And I'm going to start first with educators, and I mean educators in the broadest possible sense of the word. Librarians, teachers, administrators, museum educators, in the many different ways in which you educate. And I'll say parents, I'll add parents too. In the many ways in which you educate, you have passed on freedom. So if you are one of those, please stand and just let us recognize you for a minute. Don't be shy. Thank you. And I'd also like to recognize those who have put themselves in harm's way to preserve freedom. So if you are a veteran or an active duty member of the military, please stand and allow us to thank you for what you've done on behalf of freedom. Thank you all for your service to our country. And now, to introduce our conversation today, it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Marcia Hirano Nakanishi, who is Vice Chair of the Cal Humanities Board.
Good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here and to see so many young people in the audience. Thank you for bringing everyone out. On behalf of Cal Humanities, I'd like to express our thanks to Tony and the Reagan Foundation for hosting this event. They have done an amazing job. Also, our community partners, the Oxnard Public Library, Oxnard Unified School District, Camarillo Public Library, for all their contributions. And we know we love libraries and we love teachers. Thank you. Cal Humanities is an independent nonprofit partner of the National Endowment for the Humanities. For nearly 40 years, we have supported and created programs that have informed, inspired, and connected Californians, and worked to cultivate a state of open mind. We hope that this conversation will engage you and inspire you and encourage you to see yourself as part of the humanities community here in California. Before you leave, no, you don't have to before you leave. You have received a copy of our latest edition of the Cal Humanities magazine, and please add your name to our contact list. Today's program is one of a series taking place throughout California this fall that, as part of War Comes Home, our current thematic initiative. The initiative aims to raise awareness and promote greater understanding of our veterans and explore the impact of war on our communities. Through hundreds of events throughout California conducted in partnership with libraries, museums, universities, schools, and community groups, we are working to connect veterans and their families with their community members in thoughtful reflection and lively discussion in the aftermath of more than 12 years of war. To anchor this initiative, best-selling author Karl Marlantes' book, What It Is Like to Go to War, was selected as our statewide read. Karl grew up in a small logging town on the Oregon coast, attended Yale University on a National Merit Scholarship, and went to study at Oxford University as a Rhodes Scholar. He served as a Marine in Vietnam, where he was awarded the Navy Cross, the Bronze Star, 2 Navy Commendation Medals for Valor, 2 Purple Hearts, 10 Air Medals. Following military service, Karl pursued a successful career in international business. He is the author of 2 New York Times bestsellers, including the novel Matterhorn, which I believe at least one class here read, and is a frequent contributor, commentator on military and public affairs. Mary Menzel, our interviewer and moderator, is a native Californian, raised in Napa, who studied at Stanford and UCLA, and she directs the wonderful California Center for the Book, a reading promotion agency affiliated with the California State Library and Center for the Book in the Library of Congress, and our partner, we love Mary, a loving partner on this project. We want to thank Karl and Mary, all our program partners, and all of you for being a part of this conversation today. And now, without further delay, we welcome Karl and Mary. Thank you.
Others will come to do that. All right. It's such a pleasure to be with you in this beautiful room this morning. Wow. Thank you so much. The way we're going to do things is that I am going to be talking to Karl for about half an hour just to kind of get the ball rolling, and you'll hear some stories and hear a little of his history. But this is a very diverse group today. We have high school students, we have veterans, we have civilians, we have people who have read Karl's work. We have had people who know that Karl has, been interviewed by Bill Moyers and maybe seen other interviews with him. And so we know that no matter what we do in the next half hour, you are going to have questions. So after about half an hour, we are going to have staff with microphones that will be taking your questions, and we'll have at least half an hour for Q&A, all right? So be thinking if we don't cover anything that you would like to know. And I'm glad to say that Major Weaver's class actually has already given us some questions on index cards that will help get us started. Could you talk a little bit to begin, Karl, about your experience with libraries?
Yeah, it's so wonderful that we have all these libraries and that they've been so well represented here. But the thing I was thinking is, we're talking about freedom here, and I thought about, what's one of the basics of freedom, which is the ability to do independent thinking. And I had this wonderful experience with my local library. I grew up in a little town, about 2,500 people. And the library shared the same building as the fire truck. And the librarian was Mrs. Whitty. And she's archetypal. I mean, Mrs. Whitty had blue hair, right? Remember people with blue? And she had those sort of sensible shoes with little holes in the front, with thick heels. And she was enormously instrumental in guiding me in terms of my early education. I mean, it was and I got conned a little bit. It was my father. I had an older brother, and he had a library card. And I'd go to my dad. I'd go, well, when can I get a library card? You're not old enough yet. It's a really big responsibility. You have to be a pretty. And I was like, oh, okay. So a month or two later, am I old enough now to have a library card? And I don't know if you're old enough yet. And finally, when the day comes that he says, okay, I think you're old enough to have your library card. So we go down to the fire station, where Mrs. Whitty held sway, and she's sitting behind her desk, and my dad comes down, and he's standing behind me, and he has his hand on my shoulder. It's like some kind of graduation ceremony. And Mrs. Whitty had built a library card that was this big. It had little scrolls that she'd drawn on it, and had my name on it and everything. And so I was very proud. I was probably about 8, and I thought, wow, I got my library card. Well, as it would happen, I shared the attic with my brother. We had the same room, and he comes over and looks there. And he says, "What's that?" And I said, "That's my library card." "That's funny." He said, "Here's mine." and I knew I'd been had. I don't know what the 8-year-old expression of being had is, but it was like, oh, Dad pulled this one on me with Mrs. Whitty. But she was so great because she'd recommend books. I'd read a book, and she'd say, well, now what you need to read is this. And if she didn't have it, which is usually the case, she would order it from the state library, and the state library would send it down in the bookmobile, and I'd wait and 2 weeks or whatever it was, and I would get my reading, and she would then send me on to the next one. She was enormously influential in sort of my whole education. Just good old Mrs. Whitty.
Well, you were telling us that you took a while to get interested in reading and took a while to learn how to read, but I'm not sure how clear it is reading your novel, Matterhorn, but certainly reading your nonprofit book, nonfiction book, What It Is Like to Go to War, that you read a lot of history, a lot of mythology, a lot of poetry, a lot of literature, a lot of the ancient Greek classics about war. And it really seems to have helped you process everything that happened to you in Vietnam and after, as you were trying to tell your own story and process a pretty nasty case of post-traumatic stress syndrome.
Yeah, people often ask if education would help or not help, and I think it definitely helps because it puts things in perspective. If you don't know anything about the history of like post-traumatic stress, I mean, you don't have to sort of study it as that. But I remember reading the Odyssey, and Odysseus, when he lands on the beach, when Nausicaa picks him up and they take him to her father, who was the king's big banquet, and the king says, "Oh, Odysseus, great warrior, tell us about Troy." And Odysseus falls apart, and he exhibits every symptom of post-traumatic stress that you could name. I mean, it's right there in Homer. I mean, and sort of you have this sense of, well, gosh, Odysseus had it, and I guess he was a pretty good guy, and it sort of normalizes things, and the ability to do it in poetry. I mean, you read, my favorites are the World War I poets, Sassoon and Graves and, Wilfred Owen, Rosenberg. They talk about stuff that rings true. And when something rings true, you again feel somehow more connected to, humanity, to the greater humanness that we all can be part of. And it's literature and mythology that allows you to do that. And I think that it's a definite advantage if you're able to read good literature or read good mythology. It helped me, that's for sure.
I think there might be some aspiring writers in the group, so could you tell us the very quick and easy journey you had toward publishing first Matterhorn and then what it is like?
Yeah, quick and easy.
Your overnight success?
That's right, yeah. Well, Matterhorn was, like they say, a 35-year overnight success. It was, I came back from the war, and I had aspirations of being a novelist. I mean, I was writing my dreams down when I was about 8 or 9, and my cousin and I decided to write a novel when we were 9, and the protagonists were 2 9-year-old boys that saved the world from space invaders. Unfortunately, that's lost to history, and maybe it is fortunate. But so I always thought, I'd like to be a writer. So I came back from the war, and about a year after I got out of the Marine Corps, I was in England, and I spent the summer, just manically typing out this manuscript. I mean, it was 1,700 A4 pages, and it was just on a little portable electric typewriter. And I thought, wow, novel writing's just easy. Look how fast it goes. And so I went off to Ireland with my girlfriend, and we came back and started to read the great American novel, and it was just crap. I mean, it was just terrible. It was just like, oh my God. I mean, there'd be like 7 pages complaining about wet socks. And I realized that maybe there's more to this novel writing than I thought. And so I started to read books, how to develop characters, how to structure plots. I even outlined Danielle Steele. I mean, because I went, anybody who can sell 70 million copies has got to be doing something that I don't know about. And I remember reading Sunset in Saint-Tropez or something like that. And just going like, how did she do this? And you start reading like Tolstoy. I mean, he had to deal with so many characters, and yet he was able to bring them to life very quickly. And how did you remember them? And, he would have, like, my favorite example is Denisov, who you wouldn't know who he was, but he was this officer that stuttered. And I went, wow, I can do that. So, in Matterhorn, we've got a guy that stutters, Jake. And I copped that absolutely directly from Tolstoy. I have no bad feelings about it at all. It's the writers are like musicians. I mean, they see something, hear something good, and it's like pretty soon it's incorporated in their work. So I finished the first draft of what was actually Matterhorn in 1977. It got published in 2010. It wasn't 1,700 pages. It had actually gotten down to about 900. But no one wanted to publish it. I mean, I wrote query letters, like, I've got this novel, and here's what, and nobody wanted to do it. It's like, nobody's interested in this war. And I don't feel bad about that in particular. That, you've got to understand that novel writing, literature, is a very difficult marriage between art and commerce. You simply don't get your books published unless the publisher can make a profit. Or thinks he can make a profit. It's just the way it works. And so you have to just learn to deal with that. And in the 70s, nobody wanted to take a risk on a big, fat book, and it is a big one. Sebastian Junger called it more of a tour of duty than a read. But it was still a pretty good review. So I gave up. I had, by that time, first my kids come along, and I had to earn enough money to straighten their teeth and do the things that parents do. And so I tried it again in the 80s. And when I went back to the 80s, it was like, well, Hollywood's already done Vietnam. There's no market. Full Metal Jacket, Platoon, no way you can do it. And in the 90s, I would try again. I mean, I would, go back to work, and I kept working on it, which actually was good. If that first draft had been published, it wouldn't have been half the novel that Matterhorn turned out to be, because I was young. I was in my 20s when I first wrote it, and I was, basically had to do a lot of growing up. And as I grew up, my characters changed. They literally did. And one of the things that I would have missed enormously if it had gotten published when I wanted it to, I felt very sorry for myself, but, who belows me? I didn't deal with the racism because I grew up in this logging town in Oregon, and racial tension there was every Friday night behind the Labor Temple. The Swedes and Norwegians would pair off against the Finns, and that was that was racial tension. So what do I know about the African American experience? How am I going to deal with that? So I just avoided it. But I realized by the time the 90s had rolled around, you better deal with this, because you cannot honestly deal with Vietnam or even the 60s in America without dealing with racism. I mean, it's just part of what happened in this country, and it's part of our legacy, and we need to look it right in the eye and deal with it. And so by that time, I'm in my 40s, and I'm kind of going like, well, I've been beat up enough by all kinds of other people, so I mean, if I write this and I don't get it right, and the African American community thinks I got it wrong, then I'll just tell them, well, you write your book, So I'd gotten some more courage, in the course of being rejected. In the 90s, I would get letters back from people saying, well, it's a pretty good idea, but why don't you just switch it to the Gulf War? Maybe we could sell it, And I was so happy that Microsoft had search and replace, because I could just put desert, jungle, hit the button, new novel, we can sell it. And in the aughts, honestly, it was the same thing. It was like, well, Matterhorn's got these mountains. It's got this big mountain. Well, they got mountains in Afghanistan. Why don't you just move the whole novel to Afghanistan? Make it relevant. We could probably sell that. And I don't know anything about Afghanistan. And finally, what was really interesting, and it's sort of counterintuitive, I guess, or counter to our prejudices, is that it was a whole series of women that got the novel published. I was just, about to give up. I thought, well, maybe my grandchildren will see it in dusty manuscript someplace, and that was grandfather's attempt at a novel. And a friend of mine was reading the manuscript, an old friend of his they'd gone to Berkeley together, and Tom Farber is now a professor at Berkeley, and he was talking to my friend Ken, and what do you do? And they hadn't talked to each other. Well, he started a little nonprofit publishing company, because it's so hard to get good literature published. Because publishers don't want to take a risk on it, because it doesn't, sell. It's hard to sell stuff if you don't know the name of the author. And he said, well, I've got a friend that's got a pretty good manuscript. I'm reading it right now. And I could almost see Farber's eyes rolling back, because everybody's got a friend with a manuscript if you're a publisher. And he said, well, send it to my senior editor, Kit Duane. She'll take a look at it. And so Ken calls me on the phone, and he says, wow, do this, And Kit, there's two people at El Leon, Tom and Kit. Kit's the junior editor, the janitor, the copy editor. She does everything else. She's a wonderful woman. She worked for like Lonely Planet as an editor, and she does it for free, the editing at El Leon. And I remember saying to Ken, I said, wait, it's going to cost me $50 to make a copy. It's a big manuscript. And you expect me to put $50 down on a novel about Marines in Vietnam, sent it to a woman reader in Berkeley, California? It's just a non-starter, And he said, he actually shamed me. He said, I'll pay for the manuscript copy. Do it. And I said, I'll pay for the manuscript copy. And I sent it, and Kit loved the book. And she was the beginning of this chain. She convinced Farber to publish it. And so what they do is they go out and get money from donors enough to make a run. And They had all the rights, and they were going to make a run of 1,200 copies, which they did. And my pay was 120 free copies. And that's what I got after 35 years, was 120 free copies. That was my pay. And they had all the rights, movie rights, worldwide rights, and everything, for 3 years, or until the first run sold out, which was, I had my 120 in the garage, and there was what was left. And so there I am with my book. Now it's published, and it's a real book. And so I thought, well, now we can go to publishers in New York, and now we can go to people to get it reviewed, and absolutely the same thing. No one was interested. And so my wife, who's number 2 in the chain, said, well, why don't we enter it into contests? Because your trouble is no one reads it, right? I said, yes. No one has ever read it in New York. And she says, well, if they've got any integrity, they'll have to at least read 10 pages of it, if you could enter it in a contest. And so I called Tom up, and he said, well, we don't have any staff, obviously, to do it, but we'll send you the book if you guys figure out who to send it to. And so my wife and I actually built a spreadsheet, with all the contests we could find, and there's just a ton of them out there. So you people who are writers, you dig around on the internet. First novel by left-handed Swedish immigrant living in Ballard, Washington, $5. There are these kinds of contests, but that's where you can start. And one of them was Barnes & Noble Discover Great New Writers. And a woman in Wisconsin who the staffers volunteer their time to read new writers. She liked the book, and she sent it to her boss, who's named Jill Lamar, who is the New York head of this program, and Jill liked it. And so she went to her boss, who is Cecily Hensley. Now, Cecily Hensley is the chief fiction buyer for Barnes & Noble. So if Cecily Hensley likes your book, that's like Oprah liking your book. This is the one you want to reach. And she knew that if they selected it, they would bury El Leon, because you have to make a big enough print run to satisfy Barnes & Noble, and they would have to borrow the money to do that. And the way the business works is if the books don't sell, they all get sent back to the publisher. So there they would be with this huge loan and no sales, and they'd be out of business. So she took the book to her friends in New York, publishers. Well, if Cecily walks in your office with a book, says that they're going to make it, the winner of the prize, and well, it's a no-brainer. Suddenly, it's a moneymaker. And Morgan Entrekin from Grove Atlantic just jumped on it. He read about half of it and called Farber, what's the deal? And Farber told him what the deal was, and he said, that's easy. He said, I'll buy all the books. So he bought all of those books and put them in a warehouse, but that freed up the contract, so then he could come to me and make a new deal. And that's how it got published. It was just a long line of sort of like, finally at the end, you think after all that, well, it was just lucky that this string happened. On the other hand, if you're staying at the roulette table, after a while, the ball does drop into your square, so that was sort of what it was.
I don't know if you want to say that to a group of young people. Sometimes the ball does not drop
That's right.
into the square.
No, if you stay long enough, it will do it.
You heard it here first.
You just run out of money first, that's it.
There you go, there you go. So just don't run out of money. It was interesting to me. You had your 13 months in Vietnam. Mm-hmm. You wrote a substantial novel, Matterhorn. In the course of writing that, you processed to some extent the experiences in Vietnam. Mm-hmm. You also wrote a very fine work of nonfiction, which is partly memoir and partly analysis and partly thinking again about history and literature mm-hmm. and what young people perhaps should think about before deciding to join the military. Many issues come up in this. Can you talk a little bit about the process of processing what happened to you, and whether this whole series of conversations is an attempt to get civilians listening to veterans and to encourage veterans to tell their story to each other and to civilians, so that we can all just talk to each other and understand each other better and understand what our country does when we have a military and when we get involved in engagements, or we don't get involved in engagements.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about what you had to go through to be able to sit here as a happy person?
And I'm happy. You know, a friend of mine sort of, in a very brief way, summarized what the issue of art and trauma experiences. He says you need to turn your ghosts into ancestors. Ghosts haunt you. Ghosts are unconscious. They're deep inside, and they're the ones that make you do crazy things. I mean, like, you know, somebody honked their horn at me because I was slow off the mark in an intersection, and I was on the hood of their car trying to kick their windshield in. Before I came to my senses and realized my little girl was in the car in the middle of the intersection. I mean, that's classic post-traumatic stress stuff. And it's because it was inside of me, it was a ghost that I hadn't really faced yet. And putting things down on paper or poetry or drawing them or telling the stories makes it outside of yourself. You actually sort of can see that ghost, and that ghost is suddenly still part of you, but it's now changed. It's not inside, it's outside where you can be conscious of it and see it. And writing the novel was very important for one thing, which is that I had a lot of anger about being mistreated, not in addition to wet socks. And I could get inside the heads of the characters, and suddenly these characters would come to life, and I would get understandings about the way that some people were, because I would identify with them, and I hadn't identified with them before. And on the reverse side, that's exactly why literature is so important. It's because you have to be able to see the world through someone else's eyes. And there's very few ways you can do that. I mean, you can't do that really with movies. You only can see it through what the camera is showing you. And in literature, you actually can identify with another character. You can be someone of a different sex, of a different age, of a different race. You can have an experience of the world that pushes you outside of yourself. And it's the same for someone who writes it. You get outside of yourself, and then you expand your consciousness. And the process was at times difficult. I mean, I literally would sit there with tears coming out of my eyes and snot coming out of my nose, falling on the keyboard, and I'd have to just leave the writing and go outside. And sometimes it took me a while to come back to it because it would bring up memories. But again, those were ghosts. And if I just kept working at it, then the other thing that's really important is that if you do that by yourself, that's step one. But you have to share it. That's why I talk about singing your song. Other people have to hear what you're doing. Why is that important? Because what the essence of the veterans' problem is rejoining the community. And if you keep it all to yourself, you don't share it with the community, you don't rejoin. And it's better if you can have a group of veterans because you feel comfortable with them, which many of us veterans have been in veterans groups, but that's still not the same because you're still this kind of on this side of the divide. So when you're doing art of any kind, or just telling your story just around the dinner table, when you're sharing it with other people, that is moving you back into the community, and that is the crux, I think, of veterans' problems, aside from just the trauma and dealing with the trauma, is moving back into community. Because when we were primitive people, when we were all running around in moccasins, everybody went to war. I mean, the chief got on the horse and went with you, and when all the hunters went off to war, everybody that was left behind didn't eat meat, and maybe didn't eat much at all, and so everybody knew they were at war. And they knew who went, and they knew them intimately. And when they came back, it's a lot easier to reintegrate when everybody actually was engaged in the war in the first place. Today, we really don't honestly feel like we're at war. And that puts another barrier between veterans and the civilians. I mean, it's like you've got this rifle, and that rifle is paid by everybody who paid their taxes. And it was made by people that were, worked in factories, and scientists that designed it were trained by teachers that taught them arithmetic in the second grade, and farmers fed them. You can see where I'm going. This rifle is this huge chain of interrelated events that we're all involved in. But at the end of that long chain, some 19-year-old pulls the trigger, and then we say, he did the killing. And what we're talking about here is killing. And he did the killing, not we did the killing. That's a very different sort of switch in the way you have to think about things. And as long as you have an attitude that he did the killing, then that person is different than you. That person isn't part of your community. And I don't think that anybody in the room is clean. I mean, whether you agree with the wars or disagree with the wars, basically if you drove your car here, that had to do with the price of gasoline, and if you paid your taxes, you know where I'm going. It's like you can't walk around without a little of that mud on your shoe. And so, again, the sharing with the community is important from the veteran side, but the community has to also start to accept that, no, it wasn't just this 19-year-old that, okay, you have to come back now, you poor thing, you went over there and killed people. It's like, we were at war, but it's so much more difficult now because we're such a big, giant country, and we're out of touch with symbols, and we don't have sweat lodges, we don't have things like, the primitive people, quote primitive, were way ahead of us psychologically. We just need to catch up again.
Well, speaking of killing, one of Major Weaver's students was saying, you saw some killing, you did some killing. Is there any one person in particular you remember? So can you tell us about the one person that made you realize that you needed to look into your experiences more?
Sure. I do talk about it in this book. And I actually deal with it in Matterhorn as well. It was very important to me. The way that you get a decent 19-year-old kid to kill somebody for his country is pretty simple, and people misunderstand it. It's what I call pseudo-speciating, making a different species out of the person that you're about to kill. It's very, very difficult to kill a person. You've been raised, thou shalt not kill, your entire life, and you're a decent kid, and you just know that that's bad. So what happens psychologically is that you don't kill a person. You kill a kraut, or a nip, or a towelhead, or a haji, or a damn Yankee, or, we're great at this. I mean, ever since humans have been fighting each other, we're great at just making the enemy non-human. Then you can pull the trigger. And one of the things that I try to talk to military people about is that just understand this mechanism, because what happens is if you don't switch back and forth between these two things easily, they remain animals and you get atrocities. At the time when you're fighting, it works, but you have to be able to come back to your humanity. And remind me about the ears, but I'll lose track of it. Going back to the time, what happened is that we were assaulting a hill, and there was a couple of people up above us, NVA soldiers, and they were throwing hand grenades, and we could see the hand grenades coming down, and we would scramble up to try to get underneath the grenades, and they'd blow up, and I had been knocked unconscious and had come to, but it was just a mess. And so the grenades had come down, and there were three of us, and my radio operator and another guy, Jake Ways, and myself, and then we'd throw the grenades back up, boom, boom, and did we get them? Nope, here would come two more Chi-Com grenades come flying out at us, and after a while, the lieutenant's brain starts working. It's like, if we keep doing this tactic, we're going to run out of hand grenades, So I said to them, all right, look, after the next two grenades come down, I'm going to go around to the side. I'm going to try to get to the side. And when you throw the grenades, they're going to pop up to throw the grenade back, and I'll get them with my rifle. Okay, Lieutenant, sounds fine to us. So I go around somehow I had to get around a sort of a knoll a little bit to come up to the other side of their fighting hole. And I was no further away than people in the front row here. I mean, I was really close. And I could see that one of the NVA soldiers was dead. And the other one, when the grenades went off, which didn't hit the holes, and got me with some shrapnel, actually, from my own guys, but he stood up and he had a grenade in his hand, and then he saw me, and I saw him, and we locked eyes. Suddenly, it was some kid, North Vietnamese, same age as the kids in my own company. We were all really young. I was the second oldest in the company at 22. We locked eyes. He wasn't a gook. He wasn't, an animal. He was a real person. And I remember whispering, "Don't throw it. Don't throw it. I won't shoot you. Don't throw it. I won't shoot you." But I couldn't speak Vietnamese, and I was trying to just convey to him, "If you just don't throw it, I won't shoot you." And he just snarled at me and threw the hand grenade at me, and I killed him. And I was very busy that day, and I didn't think much of it. I mean, I was actually happy that I killed him. And in fact, one of the more embarrassing things was that the first shot that I shot, I do what they call in the Marine Corps bucking your shot. If you're like this and you anticipate the recoil, you go like that. Well, the barrel goes down, and I hit the front of the fighting hole and hit the dirt first. So instead of a clean shot, I only got him after it hit the dirt. And I remember being sort of like, that wasn't very good. I mean, it's amazing. You're in the middle of this, and that's what is going on in your mind is your marksmanship you bucked your shot. About 1990, a long time after that, I'm driving up I-5, and it's 2 o'clock in the morning, and I've got country music on the radio and this little bubble of light going up the dark freeway. I'm in control. That's, veterans love to be in control. I'm on a mission. I have to get to Seattle. We have a mission, so everything is really great, Nobody's bothering me, and the kids aren't even around. And all of a sudden in the windshield, I see these two eyes. I just was like, oh, God. And I mean, I'm sophisticated enough to know that, there wasn't some ghost or two eyes out there in the middle of the night. But it was like, Karl, you're going to have to deal with that particular killing, because I killed a lot more than him. But that was the one where he was a real human being. And that is a lot of the reason this book got written, is because I just had to deal with killing a real human being and work it out.
Where do these names even come from? Like, why a gook?
I don't know where that comes from. I think it came from the Korean War originally, and probably I would guess it might be some typical American mispronunciation of something that used to be meaningful, but I really don't know. Some of them are, fairly easy to, towelhead, you can pretty well understand that because, headgear. But Haji, that's, somebody that is a Muslim that goes on the journey, and so it's just, I don't know where Yankee comes from, or kraut, sauerkraut, I guess. Anyway, we're very inventive.
Yeah. I want to open things up for questions, because I can see even these few questions we have from Major Weaver's class are really interesting, and I want to ask you one of them that is based in the text here. Let me just find it so that I can give the right concept, the right context. When you're talking about your radio man and you surviving the explosion, being hit with shrapnel, I now have all sorts of feelings. Suppose it was one of my sons, Peter or Alex, trapped, filled with fear as these huge American Marines, known to be ruthless, even crazy, came relentlessly from out of the jungle, swarming up the hill, killing his friends in their holes around him. Actually, the question is, you put your sons in the situation of war on this page. Would you have protected them in combat more than yourself if they had been there?
I think so, yeah. I think that there's a deep genetic, probably, part of parents that generally they will sacrifice themselves. I've often had this theory, that men will sacrifice themselves for the tribe, and women will sacrifice themselves for the child. And I think, but in both cases, we have an altruistic side of us. We have a dark side. We really are like I say, we're not the top of the food chain because we're nice, We are really a fierce species, but that fierceness includes protecting your own, protecting your young. So I don't have any doubt I would put them first.
Staff with microphones are going to be looking for your raised hands, okay, in the audience. We won't be able to call on you from here because the lights are in our eyes. So you will see John is on one side, yes? And there's a microphone there.
Hi, it's such an honor to meet you. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm a therapist that works a lot with military active duty and veterans. Is there something that you could tell me that would help me in my journey to help the people that I work with? I have read your book, by the way. That was a huge help.
Yeah, I think that one of the most important things for helping veterans is to remember that they're individuals. They're not veterans. They're somebody that has had an experience of war. Because if you start labeling them that way, you again have this barrier. And I think that what's really important is something that you have naturally. You don't even really need to think about it because you're a woman. And I think that that's very important, and I'll tell you why I think that. I was a mess when I got done with Vietnam, and doing a lot of drugs, sex, rock and roll. I mean, it was just the typical way of dealing with, post-traumatic stress, which of course I didn't have. And all my friends said, "What's this stuff about nightmares?" It's BS. We don't have nightmares, no problem. Of course, 15 years later, we're all having nightmares. But so I went back to Oxford, and as I said, I was a mess. I was isolated. I didn't want to talk to people. I had this attitude, you don't know what the F I've been through, and so I'm not going to talk to you. And that was my half of the problem. And I met a girl named Jill Challen, and she invited me to tea. I thought, oh, okay, I'll go to tea. And of course, I went to tea, and I thought I'd be special, but there was about 8 other boys there. So anyway, I talked to her, and then I saw her again at a class, and she said, well, why don't you come over for tea again? And I thought, well, yeah, okay, so I'll go over for tea. And this time, there weren't as many boys, and it was just nice. And then after a while, I started to just show up. I just started to show up. I just, it wasn't I didn't want tea. I wanted capital F feminine, because I had a big hole in me. And that's what I was unconscious of it at the time. But that's what I was looking for, was to balance out that experience. And our culture's bad at capital F feminine. The women and the men both are skewed clear over on the side of the value system. And those girls, I can remember after I become sort of a regular, I guess, at tea time, I went up and I knocked on Jill's door, and she opens the door and peeks out. Oh, Karl, yes, I'm terribly busy today. I'm not going to be able to give you tea because I've got an essay due and I'm just beavering away. But we all got together and we decided that Leslie has you this afternoon. These girls had just made me a project. And all they did was just talk to me and give me tea. I mean, there was nothing sexual. It was just that. It was the feminine being lavished on me. And I talked to them later. I've met a couple of them, since, and because the book came out in England and everything. And the two that I talked to both said, we didn't really know what we were doing, but we knew that you needed something. And so we just thought, well, we'll just give him tea, and he's different. And we didn't even talk about the war. I mean, very, very little. So I think that when you say, what can you do for some veteran, is you keep at it. They'll go like, I don't need this stuff. Come back the next week, and you keep at it. I don't want to talk about it. All right, well, maybe we can talk about, what did you have for breakfast, before you went on a patrol? You don't have to talk about the heavy stuff. You just have to talk to people, veterans, because they are people that have gone through a certain experience, and they're going to be touchy and not want to do it. I had a friend that would come over and get me out of bed. I'd be depressed. I don't want to go. He'd say, we're going to the beach. Get out of here, Steve. I don't want to go to the beach. I don't want to do anything. I just want to drink. We're going to the beach. Weekend after weekend, he'd come back, and he literally wouldn't even knock on the door. He'd come in because he knew where I'd be. And come on, we're going to the beach. I remember that to this day. Those girls and that effort of his, which was, again, the connecting and the community is so important. And I just call that grace, because I was lucky I had those girls, and I had a friend like Steve. And I had a relatively easy time of it. I stopped doing drugs. I stopped drinking because the hole got filled. So I think just sort of treat them at the level of individual, and don't give up, and just be your warm self. And I think that's what they need.
I'm Michael from Runnymede High School from our NJROTC unit. And were there ever people praying for you when you got out and when you're in Vietnam, like from any church or any community?
I'm having a hard time hearing you. Can you put it up closer? Yeah.
Were there ever people praying for you when you were in Vietnam and or when you came home from like maybe a church or something like that from your community?
Were there people praying for me? Is that the question?
Yes.
All right. Yes. My mother, my grandmother, totally told me that they would pray for me all the time, and I think that was important. So because it was sort of like, you sort of like, you hope God's sort of there, He's going to be with you. And I did learn in Vietnam that God really didn't care which side won that war. He just probably thought both sides were really stupid to be doing what we were doing to each other. But somehow I came to understand what God's really interested in is your soul. What are you doing with this experience? How are you getting through it? But God is pretty abstract. I mean, it's like, unless you're a mystic, you don't have a direct experience. But your grandmother and your mom, they're real concrete and not abstract. And sort of knowing that I got them on my side, it was really sort of part of it. It's like I got this help, they're on my side. And that was real important. So the praying, whether the praying did anything or not, I really don't know. But the fact that they were praying was very important.
Question. When you look at it at a macro level today versus Vietnam, some of us are from your era, and we came back from Asia and we were treated poorly. But today, the ordinary soldier is esteemed. What do you see on a macro level? What caused that change, that transition?
Yeah, I mean, from basically hatred that faced us. Well, for starters, I tried to understand where that hatred came from. Why did they blame some 19-year-old for the foreign policy? Why were we scapegoated like that? And my theory is that it's this shadow side of ourselves, is that there were a whole lot of people in this country at that time that felt that we were doing something wrong, that we shouldn't be in Vietnam, and we shouldn't be dropping, Agent Orange on people. And so they felt it was wrong. But they didn't want to take this responsibility of, I'm dropping the napalm, I'm paying my taxes, and we are involved in it. So it's an easy thing to do and say, you're the demon. You're the one that did that, not us. But I mean, we couldn't have done that without the entire economy and the full power of the United States, which is everybody else. So I think that where that came from is that this sense of just, I feel bad about what we're doing, and I don't want to be involved in saying that I have a part of it, so you did it. And I think that that's just, Carl Jung calls that casting your shadow parts onto other people. You project it on other people. Well, I think that luckily we progress. I mean, we moved from the 60s where racism was just everywhere, and We've made huge progress on that, and we made progress in terms of treating the kids that come back from war. And I think the country simply learned from that experience as they grew. Those people grew up and said, "What was I doing?" In fact, I had an experience. I went to Mrs. Dalloway's bookstore in Berkeley, which, I can remember when Deb Seeger, who's the director of publicity at Grove, said, "Well, we're going to book you into Mrs. Dalloway's at Berkeley." I said, "God, send me back to Vietnam. I'm not going to Berkeley," And she called up the woman who owns the store and she said, "No, there won't be people with signs. They won't be throwing things at him. It'll be okay." And I went to the bookstore, and it was filled, and people out on the street. And it was 99%, people who had been against the war and protesting the war. And I started to do my reading and about to do my thing. And very soon after I started talking, the questions started going between people in the store. And they were analyzing, why did we do that? Why did we behave like that? We thought the war was wrong, but why do you think we, and someone say, "Well, I think I did it because of this." And I was just sitting there watching it. And it was these people being adults, growing up, and reflecting on what they had done. And I think that the whole nation was a part of that. It's just like, that was something that shouldn't have been done. And we were bad to do that, and we're not going to do it again. So I think that the experience that the Vietnam veterans went through was actually came out the other side, that the country learned a lesson that way. And I think it's pretty simple. You have to give people credit for growing up eventually.
Good morning. I'm Rocky Parker from St. Margaret's Episcopal School, and my question has to do with early on in your second book. You talk about your time at Oxford, and then you leave Oxford and you go to, I believe, North Africa. Mm-hmm. And hearing your feelings, what made you, if you will, turn yourself in, go back to the U.S. Embassy, and what was the thought process in there? Because if I recall right, you were on active duty, and you were with the Marines, and yet you left Oxford not planning to serve in the Marines.
Yeah. I left Oxford not knowing what I was going to do. I joined something called PLC, Platoon Leaders Class, which you go to boot camp, and then, if you get through the program and they don't wash you out, you go to the college of your choice, and you go into the Marine Corps Reserve. So I was in the Marine Corps Reserve when I was at Yale, and I'd go back to summer to do another PLC thing. And so when I got the scholarship to go to Oxford, I actually didn't think that I'd be able to go, because as soon as you get graduated, then the Marines commission you, and you don't go to OCS or anything. You just go immediately to the first school, the basic school, and then off to Vietnam. And they were very short of junior officers. This is 1967. But the Marine Corps said, "No, that's fine. We're proud that you got the scholarship, and we'll get you later." And they assigned me an inactive duty status with some Navy base or even some administrative place in London. So that was my actual assignment, but I was on inactive duty, so no need to wear uniforms or anything like that. And about 5 or 6 weeks into my first term at Oxford, I can only say that I began to feel guilty. First of all, the guys that I had gone through PLC with were all going to Vietnam, and I was drinking beer and hanging out with the girls and having a great time. And I came from a very small little school, maybe 250 kids, so 125, but 5 boys from my school died in Vietnam. Huge percentage of my high school mates went into the service. And as an aside, we called it the service when we were growing up. It's called the military today. Huge switch. Not the service, it's the military. And so I didn't know what to do, because I was in, so it wouldn't be just sort of like turn in your draft card and run to Canada. It would be called desertion. But I couldn't sit behind the privilege of being able to not make up my mind about the war. I'm sort of a black and white person in a lot of ways. And there was another friend of mine who was just the opposite of me, a guy named Mike Fredrickson. And I remember one night we were both agonizing about, and it was really agonizing, about whether to leave Oxford, him to go to Canada, turn in his draft card, and me to go back into the Marines on active service. And we parted ways, and I said, well, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I can't stay here. And, and I was really young. I was 22. And so I just took all the money from the scholarship, which they give you ahead of time, and I went to North Africa, trying to decide what to do about this feeling of you either have to go to the war or you have to go to Sweden. I couldn't stay there behind that scholarship and avoid that choice. That was just my personal makeup. And so I spent quite a long time in North Africa and, doing things that, smoked a lot of keef and hung out with, a lot of different people. And something in me just kept going. And I can't tell you what it was exactly growing up the way I grew up, going through Marine training. I just woke up one morning and I said, I'm going to the war. Somehow all that turmoil in me just went like this. I couldn't go back to Oxford. I couldn't go to Sweden. I'm not a deserter. I'm a Marine. I'm going to the war. Even though at that point I thought that the war was wrong. But my duty was, as far as I was concerned, to my fellow Marines. I thought I'd make a good officer. I thought I'd do a good job. And I'd sworn to uphold the Constitution. And I believe strongly that if you're in the military, you do what the civilians tell you. You don't make up your own mind about what you do. That's all my value system. And it just coalesced. And it was really funny. So I hitchhiked north to this Navy base. It wasn't an embassy. It was a Navy base in Kenitra. And I walk into the office, and there's this young Navy JG sitting behind the desk. And I've got hair down on my shoulders and a jalaba that's made out of camel hair, and I stunk probably, and yellow shoes. All my Western clothes were gone. And yes, he looks at me and I said, Lieutenant Marlantes, United States Marine Corps, I want to report for active duty. And he literally looked at me, and I remember him pushing his chair back away from the desk, and he says, why me? What are you going to do with this guy? He walks out of the desert, So I go, hi, I'm a Marine. I want to come, Well, anyway, he sent me back. He says, where are you assigned? I said, this place in London. Go there. Go to London. I went and I wrote a letter, and I was in Quantico in about 2 weeks. It didn't take the Marines very long to get me. But that's the best I can explain of how that decision to finally just coalesce with all my values came about, in spite of the fact that I didn't agree with the war.
Hi, I'm Andrea Reyes from Oxnard High School ROTC program. I wanted to know, how was it like your first day of war?
How what?
How was it like your first day of war?
How the first day of war was?
Yeah.
How was it like your
First day of war. Okay, I can tell you exactly. Yeah. I arrived in the country and was assigned to the 3rd Marine Division. And from there I was assigned to 4th Marine Regiment and 1st Battalion. And where we were was where the demilitarized zone, the DMZ, hit the Laotian border. And it's high in the mountains. 5,000 feet up. It's quite high. And beautiful jungle. And I was supposed to go to join Charlie Company, which is where I was assigned to have a platoon. And so we got out to a place called Vandegrift Combat Base, which is the regimental sort of rear area, right in the middle of the country. And they loaded us up with all kinds of sacks of mail and stuff, because anytime anybody was going out to one of these, where the companies were way out in the mountains, you loaded them up with everything you could think of to help resupply. And so I'm sitting there with a sack there's a red sack full of mail between my knees and in the back of a CH-46. And all of a sudden there was this and holes appeared in the fuselage. And I went, holy moly, somebody's shooting at this helicopter, you know, and well, the helicopter just goes into this, you know, right down, and smashes into this really rough landing zone. They had just cleared some trees. There were still stumps and stuff there. The pilots were marvelous to get in and out of those zones. And I just went running out of the back door with this sack, and I didn't know what was going on. I jumped into a pile of slash, and the chopper takes off, and I'm there sort of just trembling with this sack, and a guy named Tim Rabbit, who was the company executive officer, comes over and he looks down and he says, "You must be the new lieutenant they sent out." You know, and he says, "Have you got the effing mail?" "Good." He says, "Don't worry, they're shooting at the helicopter. They're not shooting at you." And that was my first day of combat, I could say. You know, it was, or I should say, the first day of getting shot at.
Good morning. Thank you for coming. We really appreciate your service to our country and your thoughts on PTSD and the things that you're talking about here today. My name is Dr. Roxanne Abrams, and I'm a Gold Star mother. I lost my son to PTSD suicide after his 3rd tour in Iraq. And I have founded an organization called Operation IV. That's an infusion of help for our Iraq and Afghanistan veterans. And I would like to know what your thoughts are on helping the American public to move into a place where they're able, not comfortable, but able to talk about suicide, PTSD suicide of our veterans, to actually move forward and help with an effective treatment program.
Yeah, that's a hard one, because what we're talking about is raising the consciousness of, 300 million people. It's going to have to be one step at a time. It's very, very difficult. But I think that the first thing that's important is programs like this, where people come together and they actually talk openly about it, just like you are. It's like, now I got to think about suicide. I got to think about what's going on. Why does that happen? And just basic awareness that when somebody mentions something, you don't just go, "Oh yeah, well, maybe he's just having a bad day." That you actually realize that people who are in certain vulnerable places need help. And that's getting the word out. That if you have a veteran, and if your veteran, one day at breakfast says, "I just don't feel like going on anymore," do not, you go like, "Whoa, maybe he just means I don't want to go to work today," or maybe he means he doesn't want to go on anymore. And you can't just ignore it. And the only way that the spouse or the child of the veteran will know that is that we have to have a lot of education and reach these people. And I just think that the best way is that we treat the veterans, but we don't treat the families. And I think that as soon as a veteran shows up at the VA, the next step is that everybody that knows that veteran closely shows up at the VA and they get talked to. Listen, he may say this and he may not mean it, but he might mean it. And if he does mean it, you need to intervene and you need to get him help before he does the irrevocable. And I think that's where I would focus, is that when the veteran shows up, you don't just treat the veteran, you treat everybody that is around the veteran. Because it's, again, we are a species that, works together. We're not like cougars, we're like monkeys. It's a big difference in the way we operate. And so you can't just treat the individual. The whole of his community, his immediate community, has to be treated as well. And I think that we just need to incorporate that in the way we think. That's I don't know if that's a good idea or a bad idea, but that's the one I came up with just now.
We have time for one more, and you will be able to have one-on-one time with Mr. Marlantes, because he will be sitting right here signing books, which you can purchase in the lobby there. So let's have our last question. Let's make it a good one.
Hi, I'm Candace. I'm from the school Wainimi. And when the war was over, or when you went home, did you have a satisfaction of accomplishment, or how did you feel when you went home?
I felt enormous sadness. I think if there's any feeling left over from a war, it's enormous sadness, because there's so much death and destruction, and you've witnessed it, and you've been part of making it happen, and it's very hard to justify that in terms of wars that are not clear. And Vietnam was certainly one of those. We did not have a military objective. We really didn't exactly know what we were fighting for. There were these vague things like, well, domino theory and this and that and the other thing, but you can't tell a 19-year-old what it's about. What a 19-year-old feels good about is if somebody's attacking his sister and he kills them. That is that gut reaction that's like, yes, I stopped violence against somebody I love. Abstractions are very much more difficult to have good feelings about. And what happens, quite frankly, is that you don't fight for the abstractions. Even my father and my uncles, who were all World War II veterans, said, yeah, we had the good fortune that when the war was over, we could say at least we put down tyrannical dictatorships and people that were doing concentration camps. But during the fighting, they didn't think about that at all. They just thought about their friends around them. And so the way that I dealt with the war in terms of not having that sense of, well, we whooped fascism, but really an unclear, what were we doing there? And if you look on it now, several million dead Vietnamese and close to 60,000 dead Americans, and quite frankly, they're going capitalist as fast as they can do it. You do have to wonder. And so I think that Vietnam veterans need to deal with that. I mean, they may not like it, but they need to deal with it. And I dealt with it by saying it's about my individual soul. It's about how I dealt with it. And in fact, I had this marvelous experience. I'm going to write about it in the book, but for those of you who didn't read the book, Joseph Campbell was a great mythologist, and I happened to see him in a hotel. I was on a business trip, and at the time he wasn't famous. He became famous, so I was able to sort of get up enough courage to walk over and talk to him. And I asked him if I could buy him a drink, and he looked at me and says, "Hell, I'm Irish, aren't I?" So I bought him a whiskey, and I had one, and then I had several too many. But we ended up having dinner together, and I actually told him the story that I just told you about the kid and the eyes. And he looked at me and he said, I can see that you're feeling bad about this, but he said, did you have any choice where you were born? No. Did he have any choice where he was born? No. He said, we live in a world of opposites. This is the world we live in. It's the world of time and of opposites. And you don't have a choice of where you are, which side of the coin you come into the world. You just thrown into the world in a certain, logging town in Oregon or a farming village in North Vietnam. And circumstances, decisions made way above your head, you end up fighting each other, and there you are. One of you is going to try to kill the other one. And he said, your choice was, did you do it with a noble heart? And, well, I started to cry because I had tried very hard to do it with a noble heart. And I realized that, ultimately for the veteran, it's about how you reacted to the war. I don't think you're going to get a lot of solace. My father and my uncles didn't get a lot of solace because they whooped fascism. They dealt with it the same way that I did, which is they just had to incorporate it into their lives. And I think that that's the appropriate path. There's very little short of somebody swarming across the beaches of Santa Monica that you can say is justifiable in the sense of taking direct military action. It should be more of a last resort than it's been, but that's a political position of mine.
Thank you for your wonderful questions, and please join me in thanking Karl Marlantes.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you very much. So I'm going to ask our student guests. We're going to release you in just a second. Bree from our team is going to come up here and dismiss you to various places. For those of you who are general guests, if you'd like to purchase a book or if you'd like to line up to have Mr. Marlantes sign, we're going to line folks up on this side over here. You can purchase there.